Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to look at another horrific situation with you. On December 18th, 2013, a young woman called Brianna Worlan was abruptly woken by an unexpected phone call at 1:45 a.m. She took up the phone and found her best friend Heather on the other end, sobbing. Heather recounted a recent discussion she had with Sydney, her ex-lover. Sydney had called to tell her that he had split from his wife, expressed guilt for their own separation, and asked Heather to start anew. Brianna inquired as to why Heather had answered his phone call. Heather picked up the phone after discovering that the number was unknown. After listening and briefly calming her friend, Brianna emphasized that Heather had only recently recovered from the challenges of their split and should not get involved with Sydney again. She convinced Heather to return to sleep and rest, and they exchanged goodbyes. The picturesque Horry County in South Carolina is frequently regarded as a great area to reside. This region is well known for its gorgeous beaches, with Myrtle Beach being particularly stunning and popular. Aside from the beaches, there are lush forests, vast rivers, and numerous welcoming communities to explore. On December 19th, Horry County Police spotted an abandoned car, a green Dodge Intrepid, parked in a remote region along the Waccamaw River. Peachtree Landing was approximately 8 miles from Myrtle Beach. This location served as a dock for small boats and was at the end of a long, little-known road that was rarely used by cars. The police examined the car's registration in their system and discovered that it was registered to Terry Elvis. Officers were dispatched to his home. Terry was watching TV on his living room sofa when they came on his door to alert him about the found automobile. It turned out that the car belonged to his daughter Heather. Terry attempted to call Heather via phone, but she was unavailable. He agreed to accompany the police to Peachtree Landing for further investigation. Terry was shocked to see his daughter's automobile in such a strange, secluded area, but he was not initially concerned about her safety. He suspected the car had been stolen because it was strange that it was there without its owner. After receiving a spare key from Terry, the police unlocked and thoroughly inspected the vehicle. They discovered no personal items in the cabin, including Heather's pocketbook, keys, or cell phone. Terry's concern intensified, so he attempted to call Heather again. Still waiting for an answer, he contacted the restaurant where she worked. Heather had not turned up for work, according to the manager, and she was not scheduled until the next day. Terry told the authorities of his concerns, noting that such behavior was utterly out of character for his daughter, and that something had gone wrong. At the time, the automobile and the riverbank where it was discovered were not deemed crime scenes because there were no traces of a struggle, broken glass, or blood. Nonetheless, authorities opted to conduct a missing persons inquiry. Police and volunteers scoured the terrain while divers investigated the riverbank. During the search, human remains were discovered in the forest, but they were recognized as belonging to an unknown male rather than the missing woman. Investigators searched for any leads and looked into the missing woman's past. Heather, 20, was the daughter of Terry and Debbie Elvis, who lived in the county. She shared a close bond with her parents and younger sister. Heather's father mentioned that their fair family has always been close and supportive of one another. Heather was independent, yet she remained close to her father, corresponding with him via phone every day. Heather told her family in 2011, after graduating from St. James High School, that she wanted to live with her best friend, Brianna Worlan. Her parents were entirely supportive of this decision. Heather, 20, worked as a waitress at the Tilted Kilt, a Scottish-themed restaurant in Myrtle Beach, and desired to be a cosmetologist. Heather's younger sister Morgan revealed that her interests included makeup and working in front of the camera, and that she was recognized for her inventiveness and drive. Heather was also well known in her town for her kindness, easygoing attitude, and cheerful outlook. Her friend Brianna observed that when people recall and discuss her, they smile since she was always a cheerful person. Heather was described by another friend as outgoing, free-spirited, and enthusiastic about life. She was always determined to live life to the fullest. Heather had spent the previous year in Myrtle Beach with her best friend Brianna. She was doing well in her academics, and everything appeared perfect. However, things changed when Heather had a chance encounter at the Tilted Kilt, which started her on the path of catastrophe. Heather was working the day shift at a crowded restaurant one sunny June afternoon. While speaking with customers, taking orders, and carrying trays into the kitchen, she met 37-year-old Sidney Moorer, a father of 3 and handyman. Sidney had a small kitchen equipment repair business in Myrtle Beach and had received an order from the restaurant that day. They began up a discussion, and Heather was instantly drawn to the man. Their interactions increased after that day. They discovered that they had many of the same interests and activities. Heather even hinted at her feelings on Twitter, saying she was drawn to older males. By the end of July, Heather had begun sending explicit texts to Sidney, who was revamping her restaurant. She also discussed Sidney with her friends and co-workers, stating that he was the same person from her Twitter messages. Sidney enjoyed Heather's attention and began visiting the restaurant on a regular basis. They frequently entertained in the kitchen, while Sidney was working on appliance maintenance. By July, their relationship had most likely progressed from casual flirting to something more serious, as demonstrated by Heather's 2 tweets sent within a minute of one other. In one tweet, she said that she had done something, but in the other, she stated that she was too deep to stop. Heather's co-workers were aware of her feelings for 37-year-old Sidney, and they began speculating about their relationship. One co-worker later acknowledged that everyone was aware of their connection and disapproved of it because Sidney was already married. Furthermore, they frequently called Heather various names and even decided to play a joke on her. 2 colleagues called the restaurant and pretended to be Sidney's wife, Tammy. In August, the rumors were ultimately confirmed. Sidney began to appear more frequently in the restaurant, always bringing Heather coffee and sweets, sitting in the dining area, or waiting for her at the back door after her shift so they could leave together. The couple frequently discussed their connection with others, and Sidney even went so far as to inform acquaintances about his plans to recruit Heather as a full-time nanny when he and his wife relocated to Florida. Heather also told her friends about Sidney's plans, and they all thought it was strange. The couple were always on the phone and frequently drove to isolated and deserted locations in their cars for intimate calls. Heather knew this was a poisonous relationship. Sidney repeatedly told her that he was tired, unsatisfied with his wife, and wanted to leave her, but these were clearly empty promises. Heather's friends warned her that Sidney was only using her. By mid-September, Heather appeared to be aware of her circumstances. On September 21st, she tweeted, "An angel and a demon fell in love, but it did not end well." Perhaps that was the day she attempted to end her weird relationship with Sidney. Tammy, Sidney's 34-year-old wife, ultimately discovered her husband's hidden affair, which proved to be the turning point. She contacted Heather and started shaming her on the phone. Heather's roommate, Brianna, witnessed the argument and later told police that Heather had tolerated the insults for a long time. Tammy once stated that Sidney was simply using Heather for his fantasies, and she even had Sidney tell her this over the phone. Sidney mirrored his wife's sentiments, telling Heather that she is unimportant to him and an easy target. Naturally, this upset the girl. Sidney and Tammy made her feel miserable and almost completely destroyed her identity. Prosecutor Chris Helms eventually established that Tammy held a domineering role in the Moorer household, dictating where and when Sidney should work and controlling all of his actions. Helms also stated Tammy was enraged by the treachery and could not forgive Sidney and Heather, so she decided to ruin the young woman's life. After the truth was discovered, Tammy began handcuffing Sidney and binding him to the bed at night so he couldn't leave while she slept. She also changed the password on his phone and forced him to get a tattoo of her name on his stomach. Sidney agreed to everything in the hopes of preserving his marriage and family. Tammy's attacks, according to Brianna, began with phone calls and progressed to systematic acts of hatred. Tammy began making repeated phone calls to Heather's workplace, requesting that she be fired. She continued to call Heather using Sidney's phone and send images and videos of the two of them together, including intimate moments. Heather wrote Sidney a letter, requesting him to halt Tammy's harassment because it was causing problems at her employment. Heather was saddened and disappointed by how the man she loved had treated her, so she tried everything she could to get her life back on track, including starting to go to church with her best friend. In early November, Tammy sent Heather fresh threatening messages requesting her address. Tammy warned Heather that if she did not comply, she would find her and impose serious punishment. Tammy also revealed that she had been monitoring Sydney since January 2012 and that Heather could no longer affect him. Heather was drained, both physically and emotionally, and couldn't understand why Tammy wouldn't leave her alone, especially after her relationship with Sydney had ended and she wanted to forget everything. Heather informed her friend that Tammy appeared to be fascinated with her. Things finally settled down by the end of November, more than 2 weeks after Tammy's frightening notes arrived. Sydney and Tammy left on a 3-day trip to California with their 3 children in their new Ford F-150 SUV. With the Moore family gone, Heather was finally able to relax and enjoy the time, free of Tammy's threats. Heather also experienced a happy event in her life when she was able to acquire her ideal job as a makeup artist at a beauty shop. She was supposed to start employment before Christmas. Heather was overjoyed and eagerly shared the news with her friends and family. However, anxieties began to emerge in her life, which might only worsen her troubles with Tammy. Heather and her co-workers at Tilted Kilt noticed in early November that she had gained weight unexpectedly and quickly. Heather grew frightened that she might be pregnant with Sydney's baby. She was upset and terrified, so she decided to take a pregnancy test at the restaurant. Heather's boss, Jessica Cook, later told authorities that she was desperate about the situation and feared Tammy would do something bad to her. However, the test proved to be incorrect, and Heather never learned whether or not she was pregnant with Sydney's child. Heather's best friend also mentioned that when she took a pregnancy test at work in early November, she hadn't been sexual with anybody but Sydney. Despite her concerns about a probable pregnancy in the winter of 2013, Heather remained optimistic. She felt it was time to move on and create a new beginning. She longed for a fresh, happier, and healthier relationship, so she decided to go on a first date with Steve Gerald, a man she had met briefly but was genuinely interested in. Heather and Steve met around 10 p.m. on December 17th and decided to drive around Myrtle Beach to see the Christmas lights. They eventually stopped at a neighboring parking lot, where Steve taught Heather how to drive his manual transmission automobile. Heather excitedly emailed her father a picture of herself at the wheel of the automobile, captioned, "I just learned to drive like a true professional." Steve later stated that they planned a second date, and he dropped Heather off at her Carolina Forest apartment at 1:15 a.m. Detectives had difficulty identifying particular clues or leads, so they decided to create a timeline of events preceding Heather's disappearance on December 17th and 18th. The major suspect was Steve Gerald, with whom Heather had spent the evening before her abduction. However, after inquiry, no evidence of his involvement was discovered and suspicions were dismissed. Heather's family and friends were startled to learn that while they were working hard to find the girl, reaching out to the public and offering a reward for information about her whereabouts, Tammy Moore remained active on social media and continued to trash her. This caused uproar and caught the attention of the primary investigators. On December 20th, after Brianna and her restaurant colleagues informed authorities about Sydney and Heather's affair, officers summoned Sydney for questioning. Sydney was evasive and restrained during the interrogation, maintaining that he was nowhere near Peachtree Landing on the night of December 17th, 2018. He also stated that he had no communication with Heather and was traveling with his wife Tammy at the time. Detectives suspected he was lying, but needed proof. That's when investigators looked into Heather's call history and phone records, and they discovered the first clues. They attempted to determine Sydney's involvement in these events by reconstructing Heather's movements on the day she went missing. According to Brianna, Heather received a call from an unknown number on December 18th, which lasted only 5 minutes. Heather then constantly attempted to phone the number back. Starting at 1:35 a.m., she dialed the number 9 times, signaling her desire to speak with someone she knew. Police were able to determine the specific location from where the call was made. There was a payphone beside a gas station in Myrtle Beach. Surveillance footage revealed that an unknown person was approaching the phone booth when Heather received the call. All of this information was provided to Sydney, who initially denied making the call before admitting that he called Heather to request that she leave him alone. Tammy Moore was also summoned in for interrogation, where she discussed her marriage and the circumstances while denying any participation in Heather's abduction. She also mentioned that Heather led an inappropriate lifestyle and that her behavior was weird. Tammy contended that the issue was not only Heather's infidelity, but also her overall demeanor. Based on their concerns, investigators decided to investigate all of the neighborhood surveillance cameras, which swiftly yielded proof. Shortly before Heather's call, Sydney was caught on film purchasing a pregnancy test at a nearby supermarket. When asked who the test was for, the man said that it was for his wife. Even more strong evidence was uncovered later, including film from cameras planted along an isolated section of road heading to Peachtree Landing. These tapes show a Ford F-150, which is extremely similar to Sydney's truck, going near the site where Heather's car was discovered at 3:36 a.m., and then leaving about 10 minutes later. Experts later established that the SUV seen on the video was Sydney's. Last person Heather spoke with and, according to police, the last person she saw at Peachtree Landing. Using Heather's phone data, police were able to create a timeline of her recent movements. Heather tried calling Sydney's payphone number around 2:30 a.m., but there was no answer. She then went to Longbeard's Bar and Grill in Carolina Forest, which is not far from her flat. She sat there for about 15 minutes before heading towards Augusta Plantation Drive. She then went back to Longbeard's and remained there for another 15 minutes. Heather tried phoning Sydney again but got no answer, so she went to her apartment and stayed for 5 minutes. Sydney's phone rang again at 3:25 a.m., and he answered it. They spoke for 4 minutes. Heather's phone was at Peachtree, landing at 3:37 a.m. She attempted to call Sydney 3 times but received no response. The last attempt to call Sydney was made at 3:41, and by 3:42, the phone had been disconnected. Security footage of Sydney's vehicle served as incriminating proof. However, additional damning evidence was discovered during a search of the Moorers' house after detectives acquired a warrant. Suspiciously, the Moorers removed their home video surveillance system on December 20th and replaced it the next day. Although investigators were unable to obtain footage from the previous system, they did seize recordings from the new one. The video shows Sydney and Tammy Moorer thoroughly cleaning the interior of their automobile and then burning the rags they used to clean it, all on the day the new monitoring system was installed. In 2014, months after Heather Elvis's disappearance, authorities had a breakthrough in the investigation. On February 21st of that year, it was stated that Sydney and Tammy Moore had been arrested for kidnapping Heather. They were later charged with murder, despite the fact that Heather's body had never been recovered. However, even in jail, the Moorers declined to testify. The police resumed their hunt for Heather's body because they lacked sufficient evidence to prosecute the felony charges. Eventually, the murder charges were dismissed, but the kidnapping accusation remained. Debbie, Heather's mother, was sad that the charges were dismissed, but relieved that she would not have to attend the trial and learn the facts of what happened to her daughter. Heather's family thought that it might motivate potential witnesses to testify. Finally, Sydney Moorer's 5 months in jail were not the end of it. In 2017, he was convicted of obstructing justice and sentenced to 10 years in jail. Following this, Sydney and Tammy were scheduled to stand trial for Heather Elvis kidnapping. The case sparked intense public attention and got extensive media coverage. In 2019, 6 years after Heather's disappearance, multiple lengthy court hearings were held, during which numerous witness testimony, evidence, and proof of the couple's involvement in the crime were presented. After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury reached its conclusion, and justice was served. Sydney and Tammy Moorer were convicted of kidnapping Heather Ellis. The Moorers were sentenced to 30 years in jail each for the crime and conspiracy, and the husband and wife will serve their sentences consecutively. Following the verdict, Sydney sought to speak in court. Despite the conviction, he remained adamant about his innocence. He addressed Heather's parents with empathy and sympathy, saying that their daughter was a great kid and that, as a father himself, he lamented the misfortune that had befallen her. He admitted that he couldn't reverse what had happened between him and Heather, but nothing could change now. Heather's parents conducted an interview following the trial, which was extremely traumatic for them. They expressed hope that this was not the end, and that Sydney and Tammy would eventually expose the truth about the crime. They characterized their daughter as a brilliant and genuine young lady who suffered at the hands of the deceitful and cruel Moors. Heather's loved ones launched a campaign on her birthday in the public park where her automobile was discovered. Residents in the region sent flowers and donations to the memorial place. The cash raised were donated to a missing person center as a tribute to Heather and to help her family find their daughter and learn the truth. Heather Elvis's body has still not been recovered. Every year on her birthday, her family posts missing person alerts in the hopes of attracting attention and keeping her and others' memories alive. Heather's mother, Debbie, indicated that she will not be able to find peace until she finds out what happened to her daughter. She remains hopeful that her tenacity will help uncover the truth and that someone would eventually tell them what happened to Heather.